So yeah, we're going to do a brief talk about our local design collective called Design the DMV. We will start and just introduce ourselves briefly and maybe talk about what we do. My name is Chris. I design small RPGs and self-publish them as junk food games. Made a handful of games, and a couple of them are here at the store, and yeah, it's
I'm primarily published as Binary Star Games. I've written Crapuchettes for instance, I've also written Horizon and many social bodies. I go through games, larger games, less narrative, but and also some minor resources.
Hi, Gene Koo, and I'm also a very tiny self-publisher for the moment. This game was started this past summer, the Bonsai Diaries, a drawing and journaling game. Soon, hopefully, we'll have a game also coming out with the publisher. This is a coloring book game called Color Jam. It's a strategic coloring game.
I'm Dominic, and I started a board game company in 2003 and grew it pretty big. We did some party games and sold several million copies, and then went into hobby games and have a couple brands. This is like my latest baby, but it all crumbled at some point, so I'm like rebuilding it as a hobby.
So a little bit maybe about the history of this little collective. About a year ago, there was kind of two concurrent things going on. One was a designer that has just recently moved out of the DMV named Lime, was hosting some local designer meetups that we're still kind of carrying those on even though he's moved. And Gene had been in talks with a local bookstore called People's Book in Tacoma, and about doing like a games event with them, and those efforts kind of collided and merged together a little bit. And after that event, we kind of talked about, I guess, having a loose collective of designers that could talk about game design, collaborate, do events, and one of the things that we worked on together is a local games catalog. So it's essentially just, kind of an advertising catalog that we would give to stores. And it has all games by local designers, and the goal, which we've succeeded at with some shops, is that they would look at the catalog and want to buy stuff from us and carry our games. But yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on the background or origins here.
The reason when I realized that there's a lot of game design talent here, from the fully amateur to the fully professional, and so I thought it would be really cool to just find some way to, how you go into a jewelry shop or whatever, and they'll say a little sign that says locally crafted, locally made, or locally sourced, and I was like, walking into game shops and seeing that there wasn't anything special about the game designers who were here. So there's been a bigger and bigger push to just recognize game designers as huge contributors to the industry. So find some way to highlight, hey, if you're walking into a game shop, a comic shop, a bookstore, and there are games that are there that are made by folks who are your neighbors, how do we call that out so that you're like, hey, that's pretty cool that that's made by somebody who I might even be able to meet, which we'll get to today.
All right. And I guess before we continue, kind of wanted to ask you all if there's any specific topics you wanted to hear us talk about, or any. Anybody?
Actually, can I just ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
So, I don't know how many people here are game designers or aspiring game designers or writers or comic books. So, maybe we could just raise hands. Who here is designing board games or wants to design board games? Now,
or RPGs.
Okay, RPGs. Okay. Okay, so we were mostly RPGers. How about, and then there's two more people. Are you here just because it's interesting, or is there?
Yeah, just interested.
Okay, so more on the RPG side. All right.
Yeah, I will say that if you're not part of the Discord right now and you're interested in joining, it's open to designers. So, I mean, and people who are just interested in the collective. So feel free to talk to any of us about joining. We have a links and stuff for that. And there was, I think that any kind of interested topics that y'all want to hear about. Yeah.
I know it's a collective, so I'm just curious. Like you talked a little bit about the origins. I guess I'm just a little curious about how y'all like run events. Like if there's, I joined the Discord, I haven't been on it, but just like what the governance or leadership structure is like. If it's everything.
Such a easy question.
If there's anything, it's a crazy question, but or is it just very loose and like, hey, we've got this Discord, hey, we're gonna try and do this event. Yeah. Just like
I can.
Or is it very,
So
if there's no leader, they can't eliminate us.
No.
Well,
So
the Hydra.
Just collected.
I would say the only semblance of leadership or rules governance is that we want to maintain a cool space, safe space on the Discord and in person. But those we kind of just govern ourselves. For setting up this kind of event and other events, it's been more of who's interested, who wants to help out.
Generally speaking, people will step up and champion things they want to do. Like, you want to connect to a certain store, well, you gotta be the guy or gal.
And I think a good example too is we set up a website fairly recently, and it was just kind of hey, maybe we should do a website. And one of the people in the Discord is experiencing that, and they're like, hey, I could help set that up, and so she did, and it's been a little bit of volunteers, hey, I know how to do that, or I'm willing to help out with that. So yeah.
Who organized today?
Sorry.
Who organized this one?
I think a few of us. Yeah.
I think we didn't really got the ball rolling, but a bunch of other people joined to try to see many of them are in the audience. Yeah, LinkedIn there. You have the SRF back there. A few people. I think 8 people showed up for the Nico up here. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Doreen, who was I think in the morning, she couldn't attend, but she came just to help set up.
So basically, I think I put out an open call for a field trip. It's basically whoever showed up to that field trip more or less helped organize it for going forward.
And of course, I'll help you with the organization.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And then I have heard of DMV Gene. I guess you maybe were reaching out to game designers in the area because you come to our game design group. So I'm learning all this stuff. I'm part of a game design group with, I don't know if you know, Wingspan. Have you heard of Wingspan? So there's a bunch of local games that have gotten pretty big. And I've been designing with a lot of these people for decades. And then Wyatt never heard of this, and he kind of reached out. So he's been kind of bringing us.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I think Sue shared was that this is a catalog that we've created. This is actually now its 3rd edition in less than a year because we kept finding more and more designers. And so we have some samples here. We're not giving them away because they're expensive to print and there's not that many of them, but they're made for retailers mostly, but they do show different games that are designed by local folks. And this is definitely a collective effort, but Chris put in the lion's share of the work with the layout and the printing. And we wanted to include a whole range of all the game designers. So we have a lot of this stuff is your team, very self-published stuff, but in that we also have listed a lot of the bigger games that are locally designed, like Wits and Wagers.
Yes, we're part of the bigger games.
Yeah. Well, when you clear several million, then I think that hits it. Wingspan and a whole bunch of other titles that are also
Thunder Road, Vendetta.
Yes.
The game.
Yeah.
The movies.
Yep. A lot of these in there.
And actually, the original version of Monopoly was designed here. Before Monopoly was a landlord game, and she was living in Maryland.
I didn't know that.
Working
Wow.
for what was then the Office of Education. So, just a bit of history here.
It's not listed.
Yeah, we should include that next time.
Yeah.
Hasbro. Was that?
Any other topics from the crowd or questions that you want to discuss? We can. Yeah.
I have another question.
Yeah. Great.
Because it seems like the core of it was started with more role-playing game designers, story game designers. So like from the board game or from the like, what's it been like, kind of crossing those streams? Because like as far as the design process, like do you find that like, oh, like we think about design this way, board gamers think about it this way, but actually we can use those design principles. Like,
Yes.
how do those as designers, how do those streams cross?
I have. So I started designing board games when I started making games, and I've since kind of shifted more towards RPGs. I think there's a lot of crossover between, in terms of design process and how you would go about play testing and finding people that are interested in your game. And so I think it's because when the meetups were starting to happen with Lime, he was looking for cheap RPG designers. But there is with if you ever Break My Game, which is a local or it is now kind of more national, but they started locally and they do playtest events all the time. And I'm very interested in gathering more board game designers into the group to come to like meetups and stuff like that, so we can have those like crossover conversations. Because I think there's a lot more crossover than the two sides might think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossover. I think board games and RPGs are telling stories, and story, like in a board game, can take place on an emotional level, and it can take place on a thematic level. The stories that we're telling with the board game are going to be less sophisticated than what you can do with an RPG. But you can still tell great stories, and they can be tied into like emotional highs and emotional lows. You can create situations where there's backstabbing. You can create a lot of interesting, fun emotions. And if you couple that with good storytelling, it really brings the experience to life. And role-playing is doing similar things. I'd say role-playing is closer to storytelling, and board games starts with a little bit of like a competitive, who's better, you or me, we're competing on this field. But really, there's a range, a fluid range between all these things, which you can really launch in different people's hearts.
And I think maybe to talk about some of Gene's stuff a little bit, I think the Color Jam game and the publishing group that is doing that, called Lunar Punk, are very interested in that space of like exploring games where there's not necessarily a single winner or metrics in board games aren't like really at the forefront. So kind of exploring a little bit of the play space that might be things that you would expect out of an RPG, where it's like a little more
Focused on the experience and not on the results.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, another local designer, Ben Golden, who probably the best known game would be Paint the Roses in terms of board games.
Yeah.
Is just finished kickstarting a TTRPG, kind of film noir feeling. So there is crossover. I think there are some designers who are like, I only do board games. And
He
there are
worked at our
some-
company for 5 years, by the way.
Yeah. And you publish right? Yes. Small plug.
Thank you.
And but there are some people who are like, I only do board games, and some people who do I only do card games, I only do role playing games. But I also think there's a lot of overlap, including the craft. Chris had mentioned Break My Game. There's all these different networks, and one of the most important things that go into game design is play testing. And so we all have a common theme as designers, which is we have to find players to try our game out and break them and tell us what's wrong, and so we can hopefully go fix it. And so even if the mechanics are different, the actual craft and the kind of the things that we need as inputs into the game design process are very similar in needing people to try out the games. We have found there's also a difference, like, you know, in playtesting, RPGs, they tend to be a much longer time period that you need to play. Whereas with the board game, you can figure out, you can do the core loop in like, sometimes in 20 minutes, like, oh, we're done. Whereas in RPG, sometimes you have to really wait, like 2 hours before you find what's not working. We also found recently when we tried to do this, the first time we did one of these events, that working with retailers, there's actually a big physical difference, as you could probably imagine, between an RPG that's like that size, that's this big or that big, versus a board game. This is actually one of the smaller size board games. Like, we were working with a bookstore and they had no idea where to inventory this stuff. Because once you multiply that by 50, they were used to multiplying, you know, 10 of these, and they couldn't put 10 of those in the same amount of space. So we were like, oh, they're actually something we don't think a lot about is there's actually a huge physical difference between these kind of things that does matter.
But getting back to like the game design craft, because I think a lot of people here are crafting, I'm guessing RPGs. I don't know if you're crafting campaigns or systems. Is it both, or one or the other?
System.
What?
Systems for me.
Systems, yeah. So a really good framework, which I think works across all kind of artistic endeavors, but especially in these interactive endeavors where you're play testing, like the players are part of the game, part of the experience, is always remember to ask, like, what was fun and what was not fun. And that's what everything comes down to, it being fun or not fun. And not fun things include a lot of rules to learn. I had to look this up in a book. There's a lot of charts, like, so you want to, yeah, question from back. Yes, you have a question.
I want to challenge this.
Okay.
With this question. What about tabletop role-playing games or other games that are designed to create an experience that one wouldn't use the word fun for? For example, Alice is Missing is a game that...
For instance, what?
Alice is Missing.
Okay.
It's a tabletop RPG that produces a lot of stress and sadness in people.
Okay.
And one might not consider that fun.
Right.
So
now I need to define fun. So maybe I shouldn't say fun. Maybe I should say compelling. Because as an artist, I kind of feel like if it's reflecting something in your world, it's compelling. And maybe fun's not the right word. But there is going to be something which attracts you to it, the experience, and things that you're like, I'm not getting something out of that part of it. And so part of the process of uncovering the experience the right experience is like learning what are people attracted to, and sometimes it's not what you thought it was going to be. And you thought the story was here, and then you realize, oh my God, this is the story that everybody wants. And then through that process, you start uncovering the thing that's really compelling. This happened in one of my board games. I want to now redesign the whole thing from the ground up because now I know what is so compelling. And what I call that the hook. And it's best, once you also break out of the game design side and into the selling side, that hook is so important. You've got to be able to say, this game is about, and people go, oh, that sounds so cool. And as you realize how important that is on the sales side, you'll start to try to incorporate that into the design side. Does that work? Maybe fun is not the right word.
Fun's a tough word, right? People take different meanings from that.
Because there are definitely not just RPGs, but board games too that explore a lot of emotions.
What's the hook for this game?
Yeah.
So in nature, you're trying to grow thriving populations around a dynamic ecosystem where there's a limited number of food. You want to grow the population of your animal amidst the threat of starvation and predation. So when there's not enough plant food in the ecosystem, some of the animals turn into predators, and instead of eating plant food, they hunt the animals around. Your goal is really simple. I just want to grow my population and flourish. And the ecosystem kind of interacts in very interesting and dynamic ways. It's a long hook. Somebody who really was into hooks would
What's your hockey spring?
My hook is that you are a rebellion against the tyrannical empire in the far future. You have giant robots.
Giant robots before.
What about moon rings?
Moon rings, you are a witch in a labyrinth trying to find the titular moon rings and collect enough to cast a ritual and stop the cursed blood. Oh, sorry.
It's a bonsai. It's the hook.
Yeah, you get to experience life from the perspective of something that's going to live for hundreds of years.
Right.
And it's a contemplative, meditative experience of drawing and journaling.
You got the elevator down.
Yes, that was very good.
Yeah, I guess tailing on that, having heard Chris and Gene give their pitches, I'm curious. So Gene's and Chris's games are the first two solo game experiences I've ever had in the last year. That was very new for me. I like that talking about like what is the definition of fun, or like what is the definition of play, or like what is the definition of a game. That was a stretch for me. When I first heard that people were doing these solo role playing games, I was like, I don't get it. Like that's not what I come to this for. And I had very compelling experiences in both cases, but obviously both more quiet and contemplative than one has come to expect from playing a game. I'm curious for you solo designers, like how did you get into that, and like what do you get the same thing out of it as you do playing a board game with friends, or like what is it you're seeking by making these kinds of games?
Good question. I would say for me personally, I started making or playing solo games and then making them partially out of necessity. COVID times made it harder to have in-person games, and there's a lot of kind of can't go out indoor alone time, and also it you still have to play test these kind of games with other people, but I can play test a system like this by myself, and I can send something to somebody and they can play test it by themselves. So there is a little bit of a combo of like I became very intrigued by solo games, and then also a little bit of like I didn't have a lot of people around me in person at the time.
That's interesting. The point about that would bring you back to the craft game, right? Like that when you really I think they say something similar is it's easier for me to play test a solo game. I'm working on several multiplayer games, and it's actually quite, for me, very hard to do the initial design because a lot of it involves, not knowing the state of mind of the other player, and then it's very hard for me to get into that mindset. I don't know how you guys do it, but like it's very hard to get to do a game that might be about bluffing. And
Right, you had a deduction game.
right,
So I know
it's a
that's
deduction
right.
game that you're trying to do by yourself. You're like, well, I don't know how you play test that except in a group, and then you have only so many hours with your friends before I like get out. So, but I also think one of the neat things about the solo game side is I've been experimenting now recently with can you play solo games in groups, and the answer, even though it's kind of really counterintuitive, the answer is yes, and it actually is this really interesting mix of contemplative but sharing, which is just a different, going back to the idea of feelings, it's a different feeling and social relationship than it is other kinds of games. So I think that's pretty easy to explore as well.
And kind of on the topic of the collective in relation to playtesting, I think by making a collective, you kind of create resources for, hey, I've got a game, well, I've got a game too. Playtest each other's games, and then both sides get that benefit. That's one of the things I think we've been talking about is trying to set up some more formal playtesting events. Maybe for RPGs, maybe for board games, maybe for both, who knows.
Do you have the solo one for this?
Yeah, that is 1 to 4 with this, or 1 to 6 actually.
The solos have kind of exploded a bit on board games now too, right?
Yeah, I did not design the solo, so we had a solo game designer do the solo side. And I read books. I do tons of entertainment solo. Board games don't generally fall into that category for me. What I was thinking about with what you said with multiplayer, I have played some solo games with more than one player, generally with my daughter, story-driven. And I think there is, unless it's created that way, there's a little bit of a mismatch. If it's a story where you're being a hero, you want to kind of be making the decisions. So like to make that experience work for me, it would be more like we're on a council. And then that experience feels like the story that's being told. So that's where I think, it's always tricky to match like that experience with the story being told.
Yeah, that's great. We did an event earlier this year around solo gaming, or just journaling games in general, which a lot of them are designed for solo play. And I think we tried to set up these playthroughs in a group. And so I think we all came away with slightly different experiences from that. But there is, I think, a lot of opportunities to take a game that's just for solo and play it simultaneously with other people and talk about what you're doing, or just, kind of like what you were saying, like making collective decisions in games where it might make sense to...
Within the theme.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, looking at Slay the Spire right there, which is a solo mobile game that turned into a multiplayer board game. Kind of interesting how to do split decision making.
Questions?
No, go ahead. Unless you have another
No, we're happy to hear from you.
Prefer to answer questions, yeah.
I guess I just wanted to ask about, you mentioned like the emotion elicited by certain mechanics and stuff, and obviously y'all are specialized in developing mechanics. Have you ever encountered situations where like the emotion and the quality of a mechanic are at odds? I don't know if this is in the game of nature, but say a species dies out. Would it be a misstep if that were a really cool moment? And someone were like, hell yeah, like I destroyed an entire species. Like,
Destroyed someone else's.
one of yours, or something that would, well, or someone else's.
So that does happen.
Yeah. Okay.
The game before this was Evolution. I redesigned Evolution, and that was one of the problems for me with Evolution. Is it started getting used in a lot of schools, and when your species was extincted, it was a really hard emotional experience for a lot of people. And so, which is okay with like boys in a basement looking for that type of experience. And like, yeah, take that, and they're kind of grumble. But then it was a fun story. But generally, most normal people don't like that.
So that's what
So if you're not a boy in a basement, like mixed couples in a family or in a classroom, that game has brought people to tears. And that's not the experience I wanted. So part of what I redesigned in this game was to remove how punishing it is when you lose a species. And so what happens now in this game is all of the population that died and any resources that you lost, the cards, the traits, anything, come back in your new species that you get in the next round. Every round you get a new species. So I kind of changed the architecture. So yes, you did poorly that round, but then you're like, oh, and that feels emotional, especially the first time it happens. I watch it and I've asked, and I'm like, yeah, that sucked. And I'm like, note to self, that sucked. And then I've asked them at the end of the game, you lost your species in round 1 or round 2 or whatever, and that was kind of bad. And how did that feel? And they generally then go, oh, it actually wasn't that bad because. So by the end of the game, they were left with, I realized I was still in this game because everything came back and I was now at an event with other species. So the fact that they had a low point in round 1 or 2 didn't bother me that much because by the end of the game, they made peace with it and they were like, oh, thank God. They were expecting kind of more of a war game experience where those lost resources means I'm going to earn less money next round and I'm going to buy less armies and I'm just going to be playing this experience out. That sucks. So that's what does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was, what do you do if that feels too bad or something feels worse than intended or better than you?
I think you always need to balance like the fun it is to attack someone or to win or to be dominant or to be really powerful. That's a fun, heroic experience. And then is it coming at the expense of other players and is that the experience you want? Because what you want is at the end of that board game, you want everyone to go, that was fun, I want to play again. You don't want one person to go, that was fun, let's play again, and everyone else go.
It really is. I think there's a lot of conversations about board games as tabletop games is art. And I think one of the things about art is you don't know the emotional response that you're having. You can kind of have a bell curve, but you just can't control how people can't control people's feelings. So one of the again going back to play testing, but then also early sales and all that kind of stuff is learning that, right? And in some ways it's like there's a third iteration on the same. There was evolution, motions, and then nature. And each time you're
grappling with basically that issue that you have is if you want to model a dynamic ecosystem, there are predators and there's all these interactions. And if you want to model the science, you want that in there. And I wanted it in there. I didn't want a solo experience where everyone was just efficiently managing resources. So it took it took a decade for me to really figure out how do I make the experience and keep that interaction.
And I'm sure you still have people who are reacting not quite the way you would want emotionally, just because people are people on their.
I mean, there are going to be some board gamers who are like, I think of it as very German because there's a lot of board gamers in Germany, and they're like, do not mess with me, I'm doing this, and like anytime you mess with their world, their feathers are falling. They're like, I'm having fun building this efficient system. And those people, generally, this is not their favorite. And it's really interesting in France, the opposite. They don't want this maximize efficiency stuff. They want to like poke someone and cat laugh, and they're like all into the interaction.
Have you gotten like unexpected emotional responses to your games?
None come to mind right now, so I'll pass on that.
Okay. So I actually wrote an article about this a few weeks ago, talking about basically accidentally creating dehumanization in this. While I was playtesting it, I discovered that basically players were just kind of like neglecting everything in between combat. And I was just thinking about that. It's like, do I want to fix that? And the answer is no, because I want you to have to think about that and like intentionally choose to do it. And if you don't do that, think about why. And people do get there eventually.
Can you elaborate a little bit more? I kind of want to hear a little bit more. So there's an RPG and there's combat, and they were so excited about the combat that
Yes.
they ignored everything else.
That's right.
And you're hoping that as the campaign moves forward, they start thinking about the ramifications.
Or at some point they kind of lose the plot for a while and just go combat to combat, completely lose context for it. You just don't even know what they're doing for.
Okay. And that's because the combat is just so compelling.
The combats are compelling, and I purposely do not have anything on a counterpoint to compel them away from it. It's intentional.
So it's possible they never confront that.
They might not. And, you know, good for them. They're living their best lives, not my problem.
Is it something that lives in the text? Do you address it?
Not. Okay. No, if I address it, then it exists.
But what's great about that long term is someone can make another game that's an echo, right, or a response to yours, where they see that and they see it played out at the table and they go, you know what, the next time I write my game, I'm going to address that point, right?
Absolutely. I wish. That'd be great. Good advertising.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When designing Death Cap Sauté, did you ever have any issues of different players having conflicting feelings about how they want to play the game? Like specifically with some people being too in detail about things and other people getting like gag reflexes or like not wanting to play because of that? Because this Death Cap Sauté is in a zone that can go very well, and it can also, depending on some people, be very difficult for them to talk about gross food stuff.
Yeah.
Why
So,
don't you give a quick.
yeah, so the game is Death Cap Sauté. It's essentially a cooking competition game in the post-apocalypse that you can die while you cook. So the intent is very, silly, fun times at the table. But to your question, I think there has been some times where, people are a little more uncomfortable about certain food descriptions, and it may be because if you're talking about like animal products, or even if it's like fictional animal products, those topics can get a little dicey. And I think ideally, everybody at the table is kind of like talking about that before play properly starts. And so everybody kind of gets a feel of like, okay, I don't really want to get into this territory, or if we do want to get into this territory, maybe the descriptions are a little more like, you know, a couple words rather than getting into like the kind of maybe nitty gritty. And I do try to address that a little bit in the book, but it's a very short book, so I don't get into it in very big pieces.
Yeah, not to be too jargony about it, but you have like the idea of lines and veils. Like the lines are like things you don't want to do, and veils are things you kind of like skate over instead of like really go into detail about it. So it would be helpful something like that.
If there's any other immediate questions, I have, maybe we can talk about one of our collective initiatives, which was, we didn't really talk about this yet, but it was like an actual like sort of design collective initiative. We put together a compilation zine for Free RPG Day earlier this year, and I think this was probably our first step in terms of like a more collaborative project. We didn't have any like through lines necessarily with the designs, other than each design being very short. But it was very cool to have, you know, kind of a project that everybody, we had, you know, guidelines around the project and deadlines and stuff, and it came together very well, mostly thanks to Binary, I would say. I think, to me at least, it opened the door for, in the future, maybe, you know, having some of the designers work on a game together, or have more, you know, collaborative projects.
Yeah, I could probably take this like from the beginning. So I think Lime had the idea for this, and I don't know, just like only layout, that's fine. So the idea was basically just, we all have these like one-pagers. Let's just combine it in a book, throw it at a few stores for Free RPG Day, and see what happens. So I think 4 stores got 20 copies of these in the end. So Lime did most of the compilation. Lime was not here. He's doing a ton of work for Design for D&D, which out there. Lime did all the work of like compiling the people and just like getting everyone on board. The main thing I was doing was, well, basically 2 things. First off was just getting everything print ready. So a lot of these games were not really designed for like printing, or were designed with like, they weren't really designed with like edge-to-edge printing in mind. So like I had to add a lot of them. Like for this one, I had to like extend out the backtrack a little bit into the so properly print that kind of thing. That's one aspect. The other aspect was basically just arrangement of the games. So it's kind of like putting together like a mixtape or a playlist. You gotta kind of have something where you don't want any jarring shifts in tone, let's say. So a lot of effort was put into trying to like make it not too weird. Like as you're just reading through, like game to game. Just trying to like put things next to each other that kind of make sense, or at least kind of like really break down.
I mean, I think what you're hearing is there's a lot of effort put into the people side of organizing a collective, because there's nobody really in charge, right? So then everybody has to pitch it in a different way, and a lot of that effort is in coordination. To coordinate an event like this, I think how many people meeting like 5 people before, right? Like, and so for even something like this, took quite a lot of work to get it. So.
This had, I think, 13 authors in here, something like that.
Yep. And I think with the collective aspect, there's going to be conflicting thoughts and ideas and desires, and I don't think we've ran into anything that we haven't been able to overcome yet, but because there's no, you know, hierarchical structure or anything like that, we kind of have to collectively just agree, or, you know, some ideas will maybe be used later, or and I think it's worked pretty well so far, and we want to continue that way, in that kind of everybody's voice is equal, and you know, hearing everybody's ideas is very valuable.
I would say one thing that's interesting, because I've been a member of a couple of different groups, is that like this does feel more like Artist Collective. Our main goal is to engage the public in the experiences we're trying to create. And yes, part of that is we are trying to get our games into stores, and we're selling them and kickstarting and all that kind of stuff. But I think the rationale for our group is really the art first, and I think some of the other groups I think are more like, well, we actually are part of an industry where you need to sell
You
things.
just call us money grubbing.
I did not say those words. But right, like I think if there is a conversation with the difference between a work of art and a product, and you try to make your product artistic, or you try to make your work of art somewhat sellable.
Yeah.
But there's a
People
little
are
bit of
trying to get their
emphasis,
board
right?
games published.
Yeah.
I'd say it's pretty true.
Yeah.
But a lot of them don't care about them. They're not going to earn money, so a lot of people don't care about their money, but they want to be published.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of the differences in the RPG and board game world, I think that is one of the biggest differences. Is that the ease of publishing a booklet is
Barriers pretty low.
the barriers
Yeah.
are much lower than a manufactured.
This has to be manufactured in China. There's no way.
Yeah, exactly. Domestic manufacturing of board games is nearly impossible at the cost that people expect a
A
board
card game you can, and it'll be more expensive, but doable. But anything that has components that need to be collated, if you're using minimum reach here, like just this would cost you guys $100.
But you could say what we're doing here is we're almost like cutting out the publisher middleman, right? Like we're gone directly to stores to carry our stuff. Now we can definitely like we're there with also with a self-published board game who's also part of this group trying to get those games, but like it doesn't scale the same way anymore. You do need to have a certain
Well, I also think you just need to decide, like, do I have a job and I'm doing this as a fun hobby?
Right.
Or am I now going to just go full-time? And as soon as you're going to go full-time, you need a better way to move your products than store by store. Like, me coming here is not, like, an efficient use of my marketing time. That's because I just want to, like, foster the community around here. I was like, oh, I haven't even had this store here. Yeah, this will be fun. But that's more like me wanting to foster the community in my garden than a good use of my time on marketing.
yeah. So definitely that kind of non-commercial thing. Like from community you can't put dollar amounts on it. Community is community. So if we started approaching what we're doing as like, no, we need to break even or make a certain amount of money, this would fall apart. There's no dollar value that you can measure.
And what I would do would like fall apart too. Like most board games are losing.
Just tell people don't knock your landlords.
Do it. Is anybody here thinking of becoming like if not a pro designer, then a game designer, like that's something you're interested in exploring?
I mean, everyone here was designing games pretty much. The RPGs is what it sounded like.
Because it is possible to at least earn some income, maybe not a full wage, but it is possible to earn some income.
Yeah, it's very tough to be a full-time professional designer, but it's possible. But you can also then get jobs like if you guys like hone your crafting skill, you can get a job at Piazza or like people that are actually putting out. And there are full-time jobs. They're just tough. There's like lots of people that would love to do that, and like very few that actually make it financially successful.
Imagine the video game industry divided by about 1,000 in terms of the money.
I mean, all of the creative industries have way more people that want to be creating the thing, from music to books to games, like you name it. So it's tough to make a living, but it's very, very fun. Like it's so rewarding.
Yeah, I don't know if any of us said it, if it was obvious or not, but I think everybody else is not full time on this channel except for Dominic, and that's okay. I mean, I don't think it's definitely not a bad thing or anything. We definitely recognize that what we're doing is way more on the indie side, and the things in varying degrees are how much we're selling is just not at the same scale or anything like that. But I'm sure, I think all of us probably have some experience with how indie RPG distribution works and how you can get them out there beyond just your local stores. So I think we could also talk to y'all about that outside of this panel if you're interested in hearing about that. Yes. Maybe we could talk about some of the other events we've done and are planning even. Yeah, so one that I'm thinking about is I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with like the DC Zine Fest. So, zines being kind of a DIY produced, it might be like an art book or political message or personal writings. Some of us have made kind of zine type games, and we are, at least some of us in the group are going to be doing a panel at DC Zine Fest coming up, talking about journaling games, and trying to maybe even play some, I think, during the panel somehow, figure that out. But even if you don't attend DC Zine Fest for that panel, I recommend it just to go. It's a really cool event at the MLK Library in DC, near Gallery Place Metro Stop. Free event. It'll be a cool day. I think it's in November 1st or something like that. I've seen it nod, so that means maybe yes.
Around that.
Yeah.
And between then and now, October 18th at People's Book in Tacoma Park would be the second annual event that started all for us. At People's Book, we'll be doing an outdoor game fair. We'll be setting up tables and consistent with what we talked about with our desire for riches and fame. We'll be selling our games there. And then there will be a panel discussion with mostly board game designers, including Andy Looney, who's designer of the very popular and widespread game Flux. The card game with rules keep changing. So, and along with a couple of other designers there at People's Book. So it's Saturday, October 18th, all afternoon. Panel then.
We have quite a few other events that we've done over this past year. Nico, I think, has ran some LARPs at the Rhizome.
Rhizome, yeah.
Yeah.
Also in Tacoma Park.
And I don't remember all the details, but I know there's been at least one or two events at libraries that some of the folks here have been involved in. I think mostly play focused. Bringing some indie games and playing them. Trying to jog my memory. I know we've done probably at least one or two other smaller things. But yeah, that's our goal. I think is just to people, whoever's interested in running something and wanting to grab other people from the collective to participate or help out or just attend. I think we're going to keep doing that kind of stuff.
For better or for worse, most of our kind of organizing and discussions happen on Discord. So I think there's a link to it from our website, designinthenDMV.org. So you can get invites to our Discord, I hope, there and join. It doesn't take much to join us and raise your hand to volunteer to do something. And a lot of folks who kind of join our Discord without a design have actually done something since. So if you're interested in having like a peer group to support you in your creative journey, we're here. We're here to promote the game's design and the gameplay space in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. So
yeah,
please join us.
That is one of the things I think that we have conversations in the Discord of like, hey, I've got a design idea, let's talk about it, or hey, look at my very, very first draft of the rules. Like, does this make sense, or what do you think? I think there's been some good productive conversations around those kind of things.
I will briefly also then plug our kind of our counterpart organization. Somebody mentioned, I think you mentioned Break My Game.
Yes.
Break My Game meets at 5 different locations all over the DC, Maryland, Virginia area. So there's 2 in Maryland, 2 in Virginia, 1 in DC. Almost all of those are every month. So if you are interested in play testing games and giving feedback to games as they're being designed, which I personally find more interesting, no offense, than a finished product. Like to me, it's like the initial game has like all the heart before some publisher comes along with their hands up all giving it to your own product. No, but so there's Break My Game they meet every month, and then the Unpub, which is the Unpublished Game Network. There we happen to have the national gathering of the Unpublished Game Network right here in our area. They hold their convention every March at BWI, the Marriott right there.
Near BWI.
Right in the middle of the tarmac. Great place to play test games, but the basically nationally known game designers show up, as well as global amateurs like myself. will show up with their game design and you can try them out. And a lot of times you'll see that you'll be able to play the games and you'll see them in stores in 1 to 2 years.
Is Break My Game for RPGs too, or just board games?
They did test I think it's I would say like 90 to 95 board games.
Okay, yeah,
And
I
they
didn't
do.
know they did
I've tested some of my games that Break My Game after I stopped doing board games, and yeah, I think it's just a bunch of different types of people show up. So people are interested in that.
Both are adding more RPG
Yeah.
support, right? Since Heather O'Neill's joined the Unplugged before, like there's been more RPGs than Unplugged, and there's been also more RPGs than Break My Game. So trying to blend all of them.
And then I just want to say, if anyone has independent questions that didn't get answered, I'm happy to answer questions. I'm sure everyone else is. Like, just come over and ask questions.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we're kind of almost at the end here. After this panel, there's going to be, I think, 5 different games being run. I think some of y'all here probably signed up to play some of those. There should be 2 games being run up here, and then 3 in the basement. And then there's also going to be 5 different folks selling games in the basement as well. So I highly encourage y'all to play some games, check out the ones being sold, and I think everybody's willing to talk about game stuff because that's what we love to do over here. So yeah, any last questions before we wrap? Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned inspiration for your game or for solo stuff coming from shelter in place orders. You clearly have a fascination with ecology. I wanted to ask what other stuff y'all do with your lives that inspire pursuing certain mechanics, or because touching grass is important. So what's the other stuff that you do that you feel makes you make better games, or puts your mind of design or aesthetics in different directions than they would be if you just sat at a desk and kept on designing until you went blind?
Well, I mean, so I think everything you do outside of game design helps, because like just living a good full life helps in everything. So I spend a lot of time with my kids.
Oh,
I try to build relationships, sometimes run games, sometimes not. I play soccer. I follow some industries and podcasts, from game design to politics to other things. The relationships that I try to build with my kids are like just critical, and I explore the things that they want to explore. So like I'm watching Andor right now with my son, and he loves it. I love it too. We both love it. But yeah, all of those things are critical, I think. As a money grubbing professional on this side of things, my life, I actually raised like $1.3 million at one point. I put up like a ton of pressure on me that I did not want it. My life became really unhappy and really focused, and like you're saying, really in front of like grinding stuff out. And I think my craft suffered a lot because of that. Now I learned a lot of skills, but in the end it suffered because I got to a place where I wasn't happy. So like making sure that you are being happy and doing the things you need to live like a flourishing life is critical to your craft.
I'll add a little bit about what you were saying, spending time with your kids. I have a kid as well, and one of the things that I've done occasionally with her is, because she's seen some of these games, and so I don't remember how it started, but she said, "Oh, I want to do that," and so we would just literally sit down at the computer, stream of conscious, write a game, and it was all dictated entirely by her, and then I would maybe add in a little a couple words here. But otherwise, it's like incredibly inspiring just to see what she's read and then what she creates out of it. It's very free form, and then it's truly inspiring stuff. I'm just outside the box where I'm not even in that world, that zone. I'm like, oh, well, that's an idea. I could build off of that.
See, money growing.
There you go. Exploiting your children.
Yeah.
Exploiting children. I'd quickly say, looking at these, I have a law degree, and so my initial interest was games is actually looking at rules and how rules can capture our values as society does, right? And so how do these rules work as rules and rules? But actually engaging my daughter, especially, just seeing how the stories we tell are bullshit, right? We make up stories and tell them about the world, and they're not like, oh, the good guys win, whatever it is, whatever the story arc that you have. When you actually are working with young kids that don't have that imposed on them, you're like, actually, they see the world clearly for what it is, as opposed to a storyline that you impose on top of it. So I've actually moved radically the opposite direction where it started, where I'm like, now I'm working in deconstruct rules, because I feel like the narrative structures we apply to the world make us unable to see the world the way it actually is. And that's going off the deep end in terms of philosophical thought, but that when you're asking about inspiration, I'm actually lying to get that together, because it was really something to see things from a kid's point of view and realize they're actually seeing things a lot more clearly than I am.
All right. Do you have anything you wanted to add, or?
I think one of you mentioned touching grass. My inspiration is kind of the opposite of that. That's pretty much it.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending here and asking questions, listening to us. I think maybe we can get set up and start playing some games.